I got a question for you about change. I am change averse. Are you? I mean, we all are to a certain extent, but I want you to think about your wholesaling practice and think about exactly how much change comes flying at you week to week, month to month, year to year. There's some of the obvious stuff, like compensation. Gosh, we all know compensation changes every single year. So we kind of expect that. But then what happens when your territory changes? How do you feel about that? Or when you get a new boss, new divisional manager, let's say, new head of distribution, new president of the firm. How do you feel about that change? What about when a product shift happens? They've taken your favorite product with the favorite features and benefits and they've changed it. How do you feel about that? You know, I want to know more about why we react the way we do to change. And that's why I've got a great guest for you today. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore. It was a heated debate. On one side of the argument was the national sales manager who put his foot down and said, no, we will not allow schedulers to do the work wholesalers should be doing. On the other side of the argument was the long-tenured, successful wholesaler who argued that having a scheduler was a huge efficiency and productivity gain for her business. So, who was right? Well, they both were. At Wholesaler Mastermind Schedulers, we believe that the first contact to schedule a meeting with a prospective advisor or COI should most effectively come from you, as your voice should be the first that they hear. We also believe that for your existing advisor clients, we can save you a ton of time and make you much more effective by letting us do the scheduling. To learn more about Wholesaler Mastermind Schedulers, visit us at wmmschedulers.com. Wholesalers, welcome back to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. Our guest today is Dr. Ron Rembisz, and he's worked for the past 30 years as a full-time consultant and executive coach to corporate management. His primary professional focus has been on organizational and leadership effectiveness. Dr. Rembisz has had a varied career with time spent in management, executive director of a large not-for-profit organization, a senior consultant with U.S.-based consulting firm. He's also worked with large multinational Fortune 500 companies as well as many entrepreneurial and startup organizations such as Caterpillar, Citigroup, Honeywell, Kraft, Philip Morris General Foods, RJR Nabisco, Xerox. Among his other accolades, he received his PhD in clinical psychology from Texas Tech University. We are delighted to have him on the line today. Dr. Ron Rembisz, welcome to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show.
Well, thank you for having me.
It is delightful to have you here. Ron, why is change so gosh darn difficult? I know that's, this generic question, and when you hear the introduction, you'll hear that I've already recorded this notion of all the things that wholesalers could potentially face by way of change. I mean, they know their compensation is going to change every year. It's part of our industry. But they might have territory changes or new boss changes or senior leader changes. Why do we react in such an adverse fashion, most of us anyway, myself included, why do we react in such an adverse fashion to change?
I think in many ways change is uncomfortable because it really leads to us needing to do maybe new things or having to work under a new set of circumstances. And it's the unknown, it's the anxiety, it's the stress that change can bring. I use a model that is developed by an individual named Bill Bridges, and he wrote a book called Managing Transitions. And in his book, he differentiates between change and transition. He talks about change as the external event, whether that's a new product introduction to a company or a change in leadership or companies acquired. There's an external change that occurs. And he differentiates that with the individual's response, which is a transition. That's internal, and it's very often and most times psychological. And it's how do we deal with that external change? How do we deal with what's just happened?
And I want to just, Ron, I just want to,
phases.
I want to dive into that for just 1 second, because I just want to soak in that for a second, because when I got your deck and I was looking at this notion of change versus transition, I had to steep in that for just a second. So what you're saying is change, if I got you right, change is the external force that has occurred, and transition is the what are we as humans doing about it? Is that oversimplifying it?
No, that's about right.
Okay.
Exactly. The change, it's usually not in our control even. It just happens. And the internal is the stuff that we can control, and it's what happens to us.
So as we I want to focus this moment on the resistance to change. There was a great quote that you had in the pre-work that you sent me, and I want to read it to our listeners. Faced with the choice between changing one's mind and proving there's no need to do so, almost everybody gets busy with the proof. That is, so we are we hardwired that way? Are most humans just hardwired to resist the change being brought to us?
You know, it's interesting. You can introduce even a positive change, and people will immediately either say, I'm not sure I want it, because they don't know what the implications are. They don't know what it means to them. And so there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about what is that change going to do, even if the person introducing the change believes that it's going to be a positive thing, that it's going to be a good thing. It takes us a while to process this stuff. And that's one of the things that we often don't give ourselves, is the time to really process it. What happens is we get fear when we hear about change. We hear the change is coming, it's going to be new, it's going to be different, and there's fear as to whether or not I can succeed with that change. I know in the old way I was okay, I was doing pretty well. But in the new way, I may not be successful. I may not have the skills or the competencies to be successful in that new way of doing things. And if it's a new leader, I knew where I stood with my old boss, but I don't know what's going to happen with this new boss. Are they going to like me? Are they going to evaluate my performance the same way that they did before? Another reason why people resist change is they're just lazy. They don't really want to do it. It means more work. I had habits that I formed under the old way, and now that ends, and I can't do that anymore. But the new way, I have to work harder. I'm going to have to do maybe more things, or I'm going to have to develop more skills. And not everybody is motivated to want to do that. So with some change, people just aren't motivated, and eventually they don't succeed. So I think fear, uncertainty, motivation, people may just like the old way better than whatever's being suggested, either by a new boss or the new organization or the new product, and they kind of liked it the way it was, so they resist. And our goal is really to help people, as us as coaches, is to how do we help people through this process of what's going to end and a new beginning, and this kind of neutral zone between the two.
So let's pick up right there, because that is a great place to talk about this transition, to talk about transitioning. So you mentioned in your information that I read that there's the letting go part, the neutral zone, and the new beginning. And I want to explore each of those. So letting go seems explanatory. It's letting go of the old way. It seems simple, but not the least bit easy to accomplish. So if I've correctly defined it, it's letting go of the old way. Again, simple. How do we let it go? I mean, there's so many things we just want to cling on to for all the reasons that you just mentioned.
Right. Letting go is often a hard thing to do for people. And the only way we get them to move is that they see that the change is inevitable. They're going to have to move forward. The company was acquired. The old leadership is out. The new leadership is in. And if they're going to have a job, if they're going to be successful in their job, they're going to have to shift. They're going to have to make that movement from the old to the new. Not everybody makes it. This is change is something that some people can just get stuck where they are, and they resist to the point where they don't want to move. They don't want to make that transition. How can we help them? Is one, to inform them, I think is important. Let them know what the new expectations are, what the new realities are, what the new demands on their performance are. Explain those in smaller bites rather than kind of the overwhelming change, and to help them see that they do have the abilities or the skills or can develop them, and organizations can provide the individual, or we can go and seek those skills out ourselves as individuals to move ourselves from that ending, from what we have to let go of, to a new world, a new beginning, and hopefully new successes. And that transition point that we were just talking about is what is called the neutral zone, is the time when we can be creative. It's a time when we can ask questions and understand better what it is that's being asked of us.
But before we get into the Ron, before we get into the neutral zone, Ron, before we get into the neutral zone, I want to go back for just 1 second to the letting go piece, because you touched on something that was really important. And I don't think that leaders that we have listening, because we do have leaders that listen into the show, and I think about my performance as a leader, I'm not sure I spent as much time as required painting a picture of what the new world was going to look like, or what the expectations in the new world would be, or what the benefits of the new beginning would be. And I think that's really important to just take a moment there and underscore. And I know I told you this was mostly for individual contributors, those for folks that were out doing the do every day, but it's also for leaders, and that important message about how you go about setting the stage to help people through the transition. Is that right? Right.
The idea of this transition process can apply to the individual level, a team level, a department level in an organization, the whole organization. Actually, you can apply the model to changes in our society. But if we're looking at, I'm a leader, I have a group of people that report to me, how do I help them? The key in that often is communication, and also the building of trust, so that they hear what you're saying as being the truth and authentic, and getting and setting the organization to have the right atmosphere and environment for change is very important for a leader to do. And you just don't spring it on an organization and make the announcement, write the memo, or send the email and said, well, my job's done. I've done what I needed to do as a leader. I've communicated it. No, it's knowing that each individual is going to go through this process differently, and each of them is probably going to need something differently from the leader. And so your ability as a leader to assess where each of those people are becomes really important. And it may need more communication. Some may be ready for it. They may be saying, my God, this has been this way for so long. I'm glad they're changing it. And they move through this transition quickly. But it's the ones who are having difficulty, who are struggling, that a leader needs to see, what is it that they need? Do they need to have more explanation? Do they just need more time? Do they need to be reassured that the skills are going to be, they're going to be allowed to develop them? They need to do a lot of individualized coaching or leading with each of their direct reports.
So let's talk about whether you are experiencing the change or leading through the change. All of this stuff that's balled up into the neutral zone. So just to paint the word's eye picture, wholesalers, you've got the letting go as a phase, and then the layer on top of that is this broad neutral zone, as it's called in the documentation I read, the no man's land between old and new. And then you've got, the promised land of where we're going, the new beginning. But what I found fascinating was all of the stuff that was balled up in the neutral zone. You talked about anxiety and frustration and mixed signals and chaos and ambiguity. That's a lot to go through to get to the quote unquote promised land, isn't it?
It is. And most organizations believe that they should be able to make the announcement and then people perform like they're supposed to in the new world and don't give themselves time to go through the neutral zone, either as individuals or as a team or as an organization. And it is a bundle of stuff. Some of it is maybe even positive. It's a time to be innovative. The organization is saying, we want to do new things. We want to do it differently. So it's a time to utilize your creativity and your innovation. And it's also a time to maybe engage again and be more participative. Time to work with the team and work with your leader, or even do new things for yourself that maybe weren't allowed or were repressed before. Now you have a chance to express those things. It could be dealing with, I never had a chance, and now it's a new leader or a new culture, and I have renewed chances to perform well. So as well as there being negative things in the neutral zone, like fear, anxiety, questions like, am I going to succeed? Do I have the skills to be successful? It's an exploratory zone, and it's a time that you could even consider an opportunity zone in this transition.
What's interesting and important about that, and again, I'm straddling the line here between individual contributors, wholesalers that are doing the do every day, as I said earlier, and leaders. And it's super important that leaders understand all the stuff that's balled up in the neutral zone, because I have been victim to the leader that comes in and says, well, boys and girls, there's a new sheriff in town, so, get with the program or get the hell out. I mean, I've heard those words. Right. And right. I couldn't think of anything more debilitating and paralyzing than coming at change from that direction.
Correct. No, it really does debilitate a lot of the folks within the organization when somebody just says, hey, I'm the new boss. You're going to do it my way or the highway, and don't give people a chance to ask questions or absorb what's going on or understand it better. It's imposed rather than engaging the people. You can tell people what you want and how you want them to do it. Or you can invite them to say, look, we're trying to increase our sales. We're trying to improve our products. We're trying to improve our customer service. How can we do that better? That's one way a leader can approach it. Or a leader can tell them, this is the new product. This is the way you're going to respond to the customer. This is how you're going to do things in the future. Much less engagement, much less choice. And you can lose a lot of people, and lose literally. They could leave the organization.
Yeah. And second only to leaving the organization is to disconnect from the mission of the organization, or disconnect from the performance that they had previously. So I almost think about it, there's the ultimate departure, but then there's kind of the checking out that we have to navigate through before that individual ultimately decides to leave. It's injurious for all parties.
Right. It's quitting on the job, and you don't get any of the performance or any of the benefit that the person has. They just gave up, and they are not going to re-engage unless you give them the opportunity to do so. It happens over and over again, and I can see sometimes high performers in the old way who do quit because they don't feel they're going to be given the recognition or the chance in the new world, and so they just they'll try at the beginning. If they're not reinforced, if they're not supported, if they're not engaged, then they do quit in place, and it becomes even more of a problem for the organization or for that leader.
I like your phrase, quit in place. I want to talk about this slide you provided with for me, this readiness for change, because I'm loving all of the attributes that are on here, and we don't have time to talk about all of them. There's 8 or 9 of them.
Sure.
But I do want to pick out a few. So wholesalers, let me read you the laundry list. It's adventurous, confidence, optimism, tolerance for ambiguity, adaptability, flexibility, resilience, passion, and resourcefulness, all under the headline of readiness for change. So let's make sure, Ron, that I haven't skipped ahead and assumed what readiness for change means. Please define why those attributes are so important and how they plug into the overall goal of me wanting to get successfully through the neutral zone and to the new beginning.
Well, almost any one of those can derail your movement forward. If you're not confident as an individual that this thing can have a positive effect and that you're going to be able to contribute to it, if you're not confident in that, it's going to slow you down. And so you're not really ready for the change yet until you have some level of confidence that you can perform in this new world. Optimism. I mean, there's nothing worse than having somebody say, this isn't going to work. The old way was better. This new way, I don't understand. I don't think it's going to be a way to go. And so they're the pessimists. They weight down the organization. They weight down themselves by not being optimistic. Openness in terms of being flexible and adaptable and being able to deal with ambiguity. Critical. If you're closed-minded and rigid during these change processes through these transitions, if you're rigid and stuck, you're not going to be able to go along. You're going to just not be motivated. You're not going to want to try something new. You're going to be focused on the old and not on the new. So there are critical factors like this that a person needs to stop and assess themselves. I think if you're a leader of an organization, you have to assess the readiness of each of the individuals and aggregately the team. Is my team ready to move forward? Those are important characteristics and factors to look at from a personal as well as an organizational perspective.
If you were a leader and you were wanting to analyze, say, your team of 12 to 15 wholesalers, and you wanted to just perhaps get a feeling for what the outcome of the pending change would be, would it make sense, because I'm, of course, happy to post these readiness for change attributes, would it make sense to score your folks based upon this just so you can go through the exercise of understanding who's more ready to participate in this change and who had I better pay more attention to because now they're probably not coming along for the ride as easily as the others might?
Absolutely. I think it is important to have a kind of weighting scale that you could utilize and looking at each of the individuals. I think also that it's important that as we look at readiness, we look at things like motivation. Is there motivation to do this? I think you have to be able to answer their question like, why are we doing this? Why are we moving in this direction? So I think that you have to look at motivation and you have to look at whether or not are we asking them to do something that they can do? Do they have the skill set? Do they have the abilities that we're going to be asking of them? Also, some of the folks are probably going to be on board pretty quickly, and that becomes your core group. If you had a 12-person team, there's probably 3 or 4 that are going to be okay with all this. And those people, if they're positive, positivity is contagious as well as negativity is. So if they're talking it up and saying how they are being successful with this new way of doing things, they become, it isn't just on you as the leader, it's kind of getting the rest of the group to help itself. And then you'll be able to see more clearly who the outliers in terms of the resistance might be. And you can work and spend more time with them individually. If you get to the point where they say, I just don't want to do this, this isn't the right company for me, you can help in that transition for them as well. And at least not have the negativity spread among the rest of the team.
I want to pick your brain on something here because it's not often enough that we have licensed, credentialed doctors of psychology that are with us. So let's say that, as you indicated, on this team of 12, we'll have perhaps 3 or 4 folks that are on board. They're in fact enthusiastic. If I am one of those 3 or 4, where do I find myself having the wherewithal to be an advocate for this change versus not? Because I don't want to be seen as the brown noser. I don't want to be a shill for management. There's a lot of pressure coming at me from folks that are the pessimists. How do I deal with that?
I believe that if I'm in that group, if I'm one of those people, it's probably better for me to be a realist than just to be somebody, like you said, is a brown noser and just saying positive things about everything. Obviously, some things that are ending were things that might have been good in the organization, and I would speak about those. I'd say it's unfortunate that we don't have Joe around or Mary around as a boss. She had some really great characteristics, and we enjoyed being with them as leaders. And so that's ending, and that's sad. And to talk about both the downside of things as well as the upside of things. So if I'm one of those individuals, I'm not just running around saying, this is a gift from heaven, but rather, no, I'm a realist, a pragmatist. There are things that are going to work. There are things that we're going to find out that maybe we were hoping that they were going to work that don't. So I think being authentic, being yourself, being a realist, being honest, those characteristics kind of become evident in an individual. It includes the leader, but if you're one of the team members, in the team member. And if you do try to be a brown noser, it's probably going to backfire. And it's probably not going to work. Eventually, you won't have credibility on your own team, and more than likely, even upwards in management.
That last point right there is, amongst all your other fine points, is a great point. I do want to just pick your brain on one other notion, and that's this notion of the pessimist. And wholesalers, we've all been in the room where there is a presentation taking place, a download of information, we're exploring a new product opportunity, we're talking about a new structure, and there's just always, Ron, there's always this undercurrent of a few, more than a few sometimes, just diehard pessimists. And sometimes you just want to smack them. I mean, if your temperature runs pessimistic, is there anything that you have in your bag of 40 years of tricks that helps me, maybe not reform, because I don't know if you can reform a diehard pessimist, but there's something that helps me get over the pessimism hump? And if you are subject to this cancer-like undergrowth of pessimism, but you are not pessimistic, you're either neutral heading to optimistic, is there anything you can do short of just what seems like the obvious, tune them out? How would you deal with it?
Generally, when I've been working with teams and we're trying to deal with folks who are not on board and who are struggling or who are very pessimistic, try to give them ways to initially have some small successes to deal with their negativity or their resistance, and to find ways for them to participate. A lot of times that negativity or that pessimism is because they really didn't have any control over what's going on. They didn't have a chance to affect anything, to make a difference. And it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes giving the most pessimistic person some part of a leadership role on the team, some aspect of it, can sometimes turn them around. You can try a few of these things and see whether or not, one, just talking to them and individually, not in a group, tell me why are you feeling this way? Why are you so negative? Having those kind of authentic conversations and letting them know that what their negativity does is contagious, but in the wrong direction, and see whether or not there's any awareness on their part of what they're doing. And if they are aware and they're just saying, I just don't like this, then say, okay, let's find a way to make it more the way you think it might be. Why don't we give you a leadership role in one aspect of this change? If it's new products, well, how are we going to market it? If it's like a new product, well, are there new customers that we can go to with this product? Is there a different way we can present it? Give them an opportunity to say something and do something. If you continue, you have continued interaction with this individual, and it just is negative and negative and negative, there's not much you can do, other than to say this isn't working, and I don't know how to make it work. Can you give me some suggestions as to what can make this work? And if they say, well, it's going back to the old way, or I'm going to do it the old way, let everybody else do it the new way, that's just not going to work.
Yeah.
You can't have that kernel of negativity inside the team.
Wholesalers, I got a suggestion for you. I'd love for you to bookmark this particular show, save it wherever you want to save it, and come back and review it when you do have change going on. Because if your firm is like firms I've worked for, the firms that I've led, you're not going to have to wait long for change to come. And maybe you'll need to be reminded about what the facets of change are, change versus transition, letting go of the old way, what's balled up in the neutral zone, making room for the new beginning. Dr. Ron Rembisz, thank you so much for imparting your wisdom on us today.
Well, I enjoyed it, and good luck. I hope people will have a little bit more understanding that transitions are normal. They occur all the time. We do them every day, and they generally have positive outcomes.
Wholesalers, come back next time for an episode of the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. You'll find all of our content at wholesalermasterminds.com, and the podcast can be found at iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play.